Regaining consciousness in the intensive care unit, the wealthy man overheard his wife's conversation on the phone. Upon learning about the will, he pretended to be dead. James woke up immediately, as if an invisible switch had been flipped, restoring his consciousness. Since his body still didn't respond, he cracked his eyes open slightly and saw that he was in a room, the whiteness of which made him squint again. Lord, where am I? And why does my body feel so weak and powerless? How did I even get here? He muttered. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. The answer to his question came in the form of a faint squeak from various sensors and devices a couple of meters away from the bed. James strained his consciousness again and realized he was in a hospital room. But how did he get here, and what exactly happened? The dazzling light overhead hindered his concentration, and a buzzing in his ears made it sound like an alarm was ringing in his mind. His consciousness was immediately pierced by a severe bout of pain, causing him to groan softly. Suddenly, James felt an intense thirst, but there was no one to give him water right now, and there was no water within arm's reach either. There was no doubt this was indeed a hospital room, but why was there so much equipment here? James had never been to such medical facilities before, so he had nothing to compare with. Threads from IV drips and various sensors trailed away from his hands, and his body felt completely weightless. He didn't have enough strength to fully open his eyes, so he could only glimpse the world through slits. At first, the sound seemed so muffled and distant that James doubted he could hear anything at all. But then, a very familiar voice sounded nearby, making his heart flutter with excitement. It was his wife Grace's voice. Yes, there was no doubt the same intonation and a slight quaver in the pronunciation of some phrases gave her away completely. James suddenly tensed, trying to signal Grace in some way when he heard the sound of the door opening. The businessman gathered himself, expecting to hear anything but this. Doctor. Merritt, hello. Please tell me, how is my husband doing? Will he lie like a vegetable for long and suffer? Perhaps it's worth resorting to more radical measures, Grace asked, adding a more plaintive tone to her voice. There was a tense pause in the room for a moment, and then the attending physician replied, I'll give you one piece of advice: don't anger God. Hope for the best. Your husband doesn't have much of a chance. But you can't give up. I also advise you to spend less time near him to avoid the possibility of accidentally infecting him with any infection. In case of any treatment progress, you will be immediately informed. But for now, I strongly urge you to leave the room. Okay, of course you're right. Forgive me. I understand everything, Grace sang in a syrupy voice. Shortly after, James heard the receding footsteps and the sound of a closing door, from which he concluded that the female doctor had left while Grace remained standing by his bedside, lost in her thoughts. Suddenly, the businessman distinctly discerned the melodious trill of a telephone ring in the intensive care unit. It sounded so unnatural that it made him doubt the reality of everything happening. He never liked eavesdropping and considered it a shameful and unworthy act for someone of his status. After all, he was the owner of one of the best restaurants in the city. If James were healthy right now, he would have definitely left the room and let Grace speak without witnesses. But since he couldn't do that, he had to listen to everything from beginning to end. Hello, darling, is that you? Your number seemed unfamiliar. Did you get a new one again? A will? Yes, I've written it, of course. Where will it go? Yes, I've already read it. Everything's just as I wanted, thanks to the notary. Reviewed it, true, not for free, of course. But you have to pay for everything. Yes, you know that. After his wife's words, James's heart raced with furious speed. Who is Grace talking to so sweetly? She's not even speaking, just singing. Is that even possible? And what exactly is she talking about, this will? But what she said next finally dispelled all doubts. Yes, darling, I've just come into the room. Well, what can I say? My dear lies there like a vegetable. In general, no changes. I think based on this, I'll be able to manage the restaurant as I see fit, and when James is no longer there, then I'll inherit it as it should be. Well, I'll go now. Still have things to do, and I love you. Well, goodbye for now. Such audacity left James breathless. It's incomprehensible, talking about her husband's imminent departure in his presence and even calling him a vegetable. Did he deserve such treatment? Meanwhile, lying on the hospital bed, James stubbornly couldn't understand why the sensors, which were supposed to inform the medical staff that he had regained consciousness, hadn't worked. He had seen something like this in one of the domestic movies. He couldn't remember the title, but the essence had been etched into his memory forever. However, it's one thing to observe from the sidelines and quite another to be the one involved, especially when your spouse has just betrayed you so easily. And James did not doubt that betrayal had occurred. But who saved him from the engulfing flames of the car? Who dared to risk their own life for him? At that moment, consciousness clouded, returning him on the waves of memory to the event that occurred on that fateful day. The morning of the elite restaurant owner James Williams began as usual, hardly different from all the previous ones. As usual, he got up with the first rays of the sun, when most of the city's inhabitants were still peacefully snoozing in their beds. From the windows of his house there was an excellent view of the city, which was just beginning to settle into its usual daily routine. First, James made himself breakfast, simple yet delicious and nutritious. He poured himself orange juice and quickly fried eggs with bacon. Then he spent a few minutes doing gymnastics to fully awaken his body and get his muscles back to normal. Trying to lead a healthy lifestyle, he never insisted on his views and never forced his spouse to follow his example. Everyone is different, and Grace was no exception. James, for example, was a vegetarian and didn't consume animal products. At the same time, he understood perfectly well that he had no right to judge people who ate meat. Taking a tray with prepared breakfast, James stepped out onto the spacious terrace and sat down at the table. Due to winter, the terrace was enclosed with a small fireplace crackling in the corner. Enjoying the fresh morning air and silence, he thought about the plans for the day to make sure he could accomplish everything that was planned. Grace was still asleep at such times, which made James feel slightly lonely. After breakfast, the businessman dressed in his favorite business suit and headed to work. He always tried to arrive before opening time to see who arrived on time and who, on the contrary, was late. He didn't like lateness, although he didn't rush to judge those who did it out of necessity, like the dishwasher Emma, who lived on the other side of the city and had to take the bus to get to work. James knew very well that the transportation on this route was very unreliable, especially in bad weather, when the city's usual rhythm was disrupted and municipal workers had to deal with the consequences of the elements. So it happened on that fateful day when snow began in the morning. At first it fell leisurely, swirling in miniature whirlwinds born from strong gusts of wind. Then it transitioned into an active phase, quickly dressing the roofs of houses in white caps. James loved such weather, although he knew that today's revenue would be weak. When a blizzard rages outside, city residents don't rush to restaurants to have dinner with a glass of something delicious and aromatic. Parking the car at the entrance, James raised the collar of his coat and momentarily left the realm of comfort and coziness. A sharp gust of wind immediately threw a handful of snow in his face, making him shiver and quicken his pace. The janitor Henry was already busy with his shovel, hurrying to clear the steps before the restaurant owner arrived. Seeing the owner, the elderly man raised his hand in a welcoming gesture. "Good morning, Mr. Williams. The snow's coming today, of course, and it'll keep coming. It makes your bones ache." "Good morning, Henry. Are you still fighting the snow alone?" "I told the security guard to help you in such moments," James remarked. But the janitor just waved it off. "Oh, come on, it's fine. "I can manage, James. I'm used to it, you know. It's like exercise for me. A couple of swings with the shovel and my body feels normal again." The businessman smiled. "Exercise, you say? Well, hand me that shovel. I'll warm up right now, get the blood flowing." The janitor tried to protest, but the young manager stood firm and didn't calm down until he took away the much-needed tool from him. In the blizzard, people passing by the restaurant looked with surprise at the respectable businessman who skillfully wielded a shovel, clearing the steps of snow. Henry nodded respectfully. "I see you're quite skilled at this, James. Where did you get such extensive practice?" James smiled. "Where else? In the village, of course, at my grandfather's on the distant outskirts. He had quite a lot of fishing there. I'm not much into hunting, you know, but picking mushrooms, berries, or fishing was what I enjoyed the most. We also had a garden, and I helped him with the crops." It was just a friendly conversation, but the snow didn't cease to fall, and Henry had to continue his work. When the steps were cleared, James thanked the janitor and went inside the restaurant. A huge chandelier hung in the entrance hall, illuminating the entire interior with warm light. This was the only place where James had ever felt completely relaxed. Here, he could easily discuss various business matters with his best friends, and here, in the heart of the restaurant, James felt like himself. This was his sanctuary, where no one dared to bring in troubles from outside. The atmosphere inside, the comfort, and the warmth were simply perfect. A little later, when the restaurant opened its doors, James was already seated in the back office, going over the accounts and analyzing financial reports. It was a routine that he had become accustomed to over the years. When James was young, he used to run errands and clean up, as there were no workers back then. Gradually, his business grew, and he started hiring staff. The ringing of the phone brought James back to reality. With a glance at the screen, he saw that it was Grace calling. At first, James decided to ignore the call and finish working, but then he thought it would be better to talk to her. After all, work could wait. "Hello, dear," he answered. "What's the matter?" In response, Grace's voice sounded anxious. "James, I need to talk to you. There was an accident. I had to call for an ambulance. But don't worry, everything's fine, and we're already on the way. We'll be at the hospital soon." James was taken aback. "What kind of accident? Are you all right? Where are you?" "I'm fine, James. It's just a small incident. I need you to stay calm and be prepared for anything. You should take it easy and wait for us at the hospital. The main thing is that everything is under control." After Grace's words, the call was abruptly cut off. James tried to call her back, but the line was busy. He felt a pang of anxiety, but he pushed it aside, focusing on his work. The hours passed slowly, and his thoughts kept returning to Grace and the accident. As the end of the day approached, James decided to leave the restaurant earlier than usual to go to the hospital and find out what had happened. At the hospital, James was greeted by an anxious Grace. She looked worried, her face pale and her eyes filled with tears. She immediately threw herself into his arms, and James tried to calm her down, although his anxiety was mounting. "It's all right, Grace," he said soothingly. "Tell me what happened." Grace took a deep breath and explained, "There was a car accident. I was in the car with you when it happened. We were hit by another vehicle. The doctors are working on you now. I didn't want to worry you, but it was quite serious." James felt a jolt of shock. He had no memory of the accident. He tried to piece together the fragments of his memory but found nothing. The only thing he knew was that his wife was by his side and he had to get through this difficult time. Hours later, James was informed that he had sustained serious injuries, and the prognosis was uncertain. The doctors did everything they could to stabilize him, but the situation remained critical. He spent the night in the intensive care unit, surrounded by beeping machines and the hum of medical equipment. It was a surreal experience, and James couldn't believe what was happening to him. The pain, the uncertainty, and the betrayal he had overheard from Grace weighed heavily on his mind. In the middle of the night, while Grace was asleep in a chair by his bedside, James reflected on his life. He thought about his achievements, his business, and the people who had been part of his journey. He realized that despite the wealth and success, he had been blind to the betrayal and deceit that had been lurking around him. As the days went by, James's condition remained critical. He struggled to regain consciousness and to make sense of everything that had happened. His mind was filled with questions and doubts. He wanted answers, but all he could do was wait and hope for a miracle. Despite the hardships, James clung to the hope that he would recover and that justice would be served. The road ahead was uncertain, but he was determined to fight for his life and uncover the truth behind the betrayal. Let it be a secret, at least for today. Erica pondered. The patient's request sounded very strange, although considering his wife's behavior, it didn't seem out of the ordinary to her anymore, especially since James asked her to keep the secret just now. "All right, I'll do everything, but you still can't drink. The most I can do is moisten your lips," Erica whispered to the patient. James tiredly closed his eyes, realizing that the nurse was right. 5 minutes later, a wet piece of cotton soaked in water touched his lips, providing the much-needed moisture, trying to quench his thirst even a little. James gently parted his lips to squeeze the cotton tip full of precious liquid. Naturally, it was too little, but James didn't insist. The main thing was that he stayed alive and didn't burn alive in the flaming car. While James pondered this issue, Erica set up an IV drip to provide his body with nutrients. Tears of gratitude glistened in James's eyes as he saw how caring she was and how she tried to help despite everything. "No, they won't get my will and inheritance. I will recover and not give Grace a penny in the divorce," he thought, becoming more convinced of the fairness of his own words. With difficulty swallowing the lump rising in his throat, James closed his eyes and sank into a sweet sleep. At the same time, the nurse entered his treating doctor's office and told everything as it was. "Doctor." Merritt listened silently, understanding that her subordinate wanted to do what was best and didn't pursue any personal agendas. "Well, I won't tell his wife that there's progress in his treatment. If I were in her place, I'd be praying day and night for my husband's recovery, but this witch only thinks about grabbing her inheritance. Thank you for being vigilant and doing a good job, Erica, doctor," Merritt said. Joy lit up in the nurse's eyes. It's not that James was particularly attractive to her, it's just that the desire to help outweighed everything else. At the same time, Grace showed up at the restaurant and began to set her own rules. Being naturally fiery red, she resembled a fury sweeping everything in her path. Taking advantage of her husband being in a coma for the 3rd week now, Grace decided to take control of the establishment. Her cold and harsh gaze pierced through each employee, harboring sincere indifference and contempt toward their personalities. The head chef was the first to get a scolding, receiving a reprimand and a fine for preparing dishes with too expensive ingredients. "Mrs. Williams, but it's not like that. It's long been known that the quality of ingredients affects the final result," the man protested. The business lady's cheeks flushed with anger. "Don't you dare talk back to me here. Do you hear? What I say goes, and anyway, from now on, decisions are made only by me. If you don't like it, go work in a roadside diner. Your talents will be more suitable there." "All right, Mrs. Williams, I understand," the head chef said gloomily, lowering his head. Andrew smirked. He liked the new manager much more than the previous one. James had been soft and attentive, while Grace favored an aggressive approach to running the restaurant business. Approaching her much like a jackal during a lion's feast, the administrator remarked, "Mrs. Williams, if I may suggest, for added effect, you should consider utilizing hidden surveillance cameras." Grace looked at Andrew with surprise, clearly fond of him. "And are there such cameras here?" The administrator smiled contentedly. Of course. How else? True, mister. Williams didn't like to watch the videos and only resorted to them in cases of extreme necessity. More often than not, the cameras are simply turned off. But after the boss had the accident, I kept them on. It's immediately evident when someone is in their element, unlike the lax management of my dear husband. But such tricks won't fly with me. Well done, Andrew. Your idea with the cameras is simply invaluable, Grace exclaimed, eliciting a satisfied smile from the administrator. A few minutes later, Grace started the recording and leaned in to monitor every move of the staff. At first, she couldn't spot anything interesting. Waitresses bustled around the hall, the head chef commanded in the kitchen, and the waiter greeted clients at the entrance. Everything was as usual until Grace noticed yesterday's recording of a young dishwasher with a bulky bag in her hands. Look at her, so clever. What could she possibly carry in such a bag? Probably empties the fridge before leaving and takes it all home. And all this right under the nose of my foolish husband. Upon closer inspection of Emma, Grace decided to catch her red-handed. Let's see how you sing when I corner you. Unfortunately, poor Emma had no idea that she had been under close post surveillance for some time now. Time dragged on, deliberately slowly approaching the inevitable moment of reckoning. At the end of her shift, Emma grabbed a few leftovers approved by the head chef and headed towards the exit. She had done this before. Ever since James allowed her to take home some of the untouched dishes. But today, everything initially took a different turn. Seeing Emma with a canvas utility bag in her hands, Grace approached the doorway triumphantly and said, "And where do you think you're going, dear? Scooped up a bag full of delicacies and intend to just leave my restaurant like that?" Emma flinched and looked at the hostess with a hunted gaze, genuine sadness and despair evident in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Williams, but I haven't stolen anything. These are just leftovers, you know, the ones that were paid for but remained untouched by the customers," the businesswoman sneered contemptuously. "Untouched, you say? And who decides that? Could it be you, sweetheart? You seem to have a good deal for yourself. What do we have here? Oh, a Caesar salad. Too bad, only half. But it doesn't change the essence. You're quite the gourmet, dear." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes. She least expected the obnoxious hostess to turn everything upside down so easily. "Oh, please, no need to cry. Okay, your crocodile tears are of no use to me. Understand? Once you lose your job, you can shed them every minute if you want." Grace remarked rather harshly. Emma sniffled sadly and began rummaging through her bag. What made it even more upsetting was that just half an hour ago, she had paid for these dishes with her future salary. Now, she faced dismissal on charges of theft she didn't commit. "Oh, looks like we caught a fish in the net. And the surname matches, Fisher. And you were still hoping for the boss," remarked the approaching administrator. Grace exchanged a meaningful glance with Andrew and continued to scold Emma. "But I didn't take it for myself. It was for the kids," pleaded the woman. "Oh, don't scare me with your family drama. I couldn't care less about how many you have, 3, 4, or 5. It's your business. You gave birth to them. Deal with it yourself," Grace snapped bitterly. "She only has 2 of her own and 2 more from her husband's first marriage," the administrator added obligingly. "They're all mine, and as for what my husband left, let it remain on his conscience. He's in prison now, caught stealing. He thought the kids would help him reduce his sentence, but I managed to get his rights revoked," Emma muttered through tears. But Grace remained unmoved. Honestly, what Grace needed right now was a scapegoat to show her power to everyone else. Emma, who had the misfortune of being caught in the crossfire, became just that. "So how about you, Fisher? Right? Well, you're fired. You can go wherever you want." Grace concluded, gesturing towards the door. Despair froze in Emma's eyes. How could this be? Could she be dismissed like some unwanted stray dog? The administrator, in turn, didn't want to stay on the sidelines and contributed his 2 cents to the matter. "Oh, and I almost forgot, Fisher. Don't count on your salary. You understand? The money will go towards compensating the damages. The news was a devastating blow to Emma, realizing that she had been deceived by everyone. She went outside and exposed her heated cheeks to the freezing wind. Seeing this, Henry couldn't help himself and approached. "Shh, dear, don't cry. Don't torment yourself. Sunshine, you know Andrew is in favor right now. That's why he's doing whatever he pleases. When Mr. Williams recovers, his reign will come to an end. And so that you don't end up completely without money, I'll allocate some from my pension for you. You can repay it whenever you can." "No rush," said the janitor, embracing the fragile woman by the shoulders. "Thank you, Henry, for your support and protection. You see, I was counting so much on this money, and then this happened. We're struggling with the kids in a rented apartment, and the landlady keeps raising the rent, saying I receive child benefits, so I won't become poor," Emma replied, choking back tears. The elderly man shook his head. He felt sorry for Emma, to say the least. Such a good colleague, calm, diligent, and never speaks ill of anyone. She washes dishes up to her elbows in hot water, and that's it. No one ever sees what a person is going through inside. The harsh life only reminds one of the existence of injustice. "Don't worry, dear. I'll help you out," Henry promised, and led Emma to the nearby store, buying her a warm meal. Thank you for watching. We've explored a lot today, from personal struggles and ethical dilemmas to the challenges of maintaining integrity in difficult situations. Each story teaches us valuable lessons about empathy, fairness, and the importance of standing up for what's right. So what have you learned from this video? Reflect on one key takeaway or insight you gained today and share it in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you plan to apply this wisdom in your own life. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below and let us know what resonated with you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Your support helps us continue bringing valuable lessons and insights. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video.